Good afternoon. Welcome to this joint workshop for City Council and Utility Advisory Committee for June 2nd, 2021. We are now back to full in-person meeting, although it appears, well, no, we have no one from the public here. That's okay. But anyway, we are still going to be accepting call-in during our public comment periods, as we had established during the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, but things have gotten much better, so mask standards have been relaxed and attendance standards have been relaxed. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. To begin the meeting, I would like to introduce the newest member of the Utility Advisory Committee, Daniel Combs. He's already been duly sworn in. And again, we look forward to having you on this committee and your experience that you bring to this. If you'd step to the microphone and give us just a brief overview of your background.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. My name is Dan Combs. I've been a resident of Boulder City since 2013. I've been working here since 2010. I was a power plant operator for San Diego Gas and Electric out toward the solar fields. I was the polluter in the middle. I have rejoined the City of Las Vegas as a wastewater operations and maintenance supervisor. I've always been very civic-minded. I'm one of those who've been on student council my entire life. I believe service is important. I love this town, and I just appreciate the opportunity to take part in this committee.
Thank you. I think your experience will be very helpful on this committee. All right, we'll start with our first public comment period. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. And as always, please be civil and concise in your comments. Anyone wishing to call in, the phone number is 702-589-9629. This is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, the number is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, did we have any written comments or voicemails?
No comments were submitted.
Thank you. Hearing no one for public comment, we will close the initial public comment period. Move to item 1 on the workshop agenda, discussion regarding the Raftellus Utility Rate Study Final Report. Again, as noted in the packet, this report was submitted to the Utility Advisory Committee earlier this year. And with that, I would, well, let me ask Mr. Porter, did you want to make any comment regarding the report?
First of all, thank you to the Utility Advisory Committee for all their time and effort put into assessing and reviewing the data and reviewing the report. The draft report was completed in November of last year, and we got the final report in
February, I believe.
So that report's been finalized. Recommendations have been made to City Council, obviously with the adjustments and decreases that occurred at the City Council meeting last week. And so I'll just be available to answer questions.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Carr is the chair of the Utility Advisory Committee. Comments that you would like to make regarding the report?
I guess I have several statements, so if everybody doesn't mind, I would like to take the time to go through several aspects. First off, thank you for taking the time with the City Council and the staff for attending. Greatly appreciate it. It helps a lot to be able to interact this way with this aspect. What I'd like to do is go through some basic aspects of the report. I'm going to try to go through sort of the layout of the report, and then I'd like to go over the recommendations and stuff like that. But I want to just give you a general feel of how I feel, and I believe most of the committee feels. I know Daniel hasn't had a chance to interact with us, but I believe. I'll do my very best to be as fact-based as possible, not emotional about it. I'll do my best to not get too passionate about it and get overzealous. So there's no intent for any harm or misdealings. It's just a matter of understanding what's going on. And please, rest of the members, well, I guess Greg and Eileen, and Daniel, if you feel he has some things, please correct me or stop me. And then we'll also have points where I'd like you to interact too. So if that's okay, I'll take a little bit of time. It could take about 15 minutes or so to go through some general ideas. So first off, I think what happened was, so the scope of the work, the way I understand it, was that the committee was supposed to be highly involved in the process. And so I think in the beginning that happened. And then there seemed to be a slight, between COVID and some other things, there was some slight degradation of the interaction that between the consultant and us. So we didn't really get as much input. One of the things that was confusing, and it seems to be reflected through this, that's what I'm trying to do, is show what's sort of reflected all the way through the report. One of the things is that the city objectives, we were given a survey at the beginning, which was sort of an objective thing, but it was like, went through, I don't know, it was like 10 of them or something like that. So to prioritize that was very difficult. We explained that we were concerned with that prioritization, but we were willing to talk about it. So I think not all the committee did that, but we never saw the results. And so whether that was part of the city objectives or not, we never quite understood. Again, and Dennis also, if I don't misinterpret anything, so if I did, please correct me. And then the cost of service was a very important part, and as you'll see, that is a major part of the report. And I don't feel that we were really included with the aspect. They did one option of cost of service, and they didn't really explain it to us. And so it's written up in the report. There's a lot of information, but you really can't understand it unless you look at the spreadsheet, and I would call it a workbook that has over 50 spreadsheets. So it's hard to follow and to get the data. I greatly appreciate having that spreadsheet. I greatly appreciate having the data. It's just hard to find the data as you're going through it. So from what I can tell, you cannot understand how they really set up the cost of service aspect and why they had such a drastic reduction in commercial without getting the background out of the spreadsheets. It's not in the report. So that's part of our problem I believe, overall too with the committee, is how we go through that. Because that's what the statement in that is, that at page 4 of the report, it says, throughout the course of this engagement, Raft-Tillis participated in numerous discussions with the city staff regarding potential options for rate structure modification, which would result in rates that achieve the objectives of the city. We were never told what the objectives of the city were. And so if you're suggesting something, why wasn't it spelled out? So that was confusing to a lot of us. And I guess in fairness, to just make sure that we're in fair, so at the December 16th meeting, Raft-Tillis was available by phone. And so they were available to go over the draft report and to comment on our comments. But the UC discussed the concerns and comments with, but the UC decided that it was just best and more efficient if we discussed them ourselves instead of interacting with them, because in the past we had not gotten hardly any good answers from them, especially towards the end. So we decided it was best to just go on among ourselves. So they were there to explain things, and we did not ask them. So hopefully if things didn't get answered at the end, it was much our fault as it was theirs. But there seemed to be, towards the end, there was some, it appeared that they were not lending any validity to our concerns. So the very last couple of meetings, it just didn't seem like, it seemed like they were ignoring more of our concerns than they were willing to consider them. So what you have, there's three documents that I believe are available to show, and we can do that today as we go through it. There should be a red line strikeout. There's the PDF that was sent in the package from the committee to the Raft-Tillis. Unfortunately, that doesn't show the red line strikeout. So some of that appears to be what was actually in the draft, and it wasn't. It was what the committee had suggested. So if that needs to be spelled out, we can pull it up. I believe that Holly has that available to show if we need to. Then we have the PDF, which does show did have the comments, and I appreciate that in there, and so we can review that, and we have the final if we can go through. I think once we get to the recommendations, we definitely want to bring it up and then go through the recommendations. So the executive summary does a pretty good job of explaining things, but I think the problem, starting off right at the bat, in my opinion, is that the scope of work, and in the executive summary, is they said that they were going to do a rate design. They did not do a rate design study, a rate design review. They did a cost of service review, and then they did a rate recommendation. That's completely different than a rate design. It would be nice to understand, okay, has Boulder City, as we've grown and stuff like that, as the rates have changed, does the rate structure look okay? And that was never discussed. So that's another problematic issue for this report, in my opinion. And in line with that, I think the history was ignored quite a bit, Boulder City history. We are a non-for-profit municipality, and all our utilities are nonprofit. So I think even the landfill, I think it's a contract, but Boulder City is not doing anything for a profit for that purpose. So we want to try to, it's at cost, and everything should be what it costs, not anything related to profit. And I did not see that the report showed any major research into Boulder City's history to understand what Boulder City does and how our rate structure could be or should be. All it was is everything was pretty much based around one option of the cost of service. Let's see, I'll make a pause. Does anybody have any comments up to this point? Okay. So also in the overall aspect of the contract, and as far as history goes, is if I understand the report right, they were pushing heavily for the city to pay retail costs for water and power, which historically, and to my knowledge, we have never ever paid retail. It's always been wholesale. And as a nonprofit city, nonprofit utilities, I believe it really should be that way. Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit later today and go into a little more detail on that. But I think, as brought up, as one of, or a couple of the members have stated, it all comes out of the same pot anyway. So I think it's more precise to have it as wholesale instead of retail. So as I was saying, it's broken down into several sections. You have the executive summary, you have the introduction, you have the financial plan, you have the cost of service, and the recommendations. So the financial plan is as Greg had pointed out in one of the meetings, it's a good resource. The overall report, so I should state that, is a good resource. Unfortunately, I don't think we can rely on the cost of service, at least not into the degree that it's laid out in. You know, we might want to take it into consideration, say, okay, this is one option, let's look at another one or two at least before we go on. Or say if there is a discrepancy, let's figure out a little bit less aggressive manner to do it. Even though it was suggested in the 4-year layout, that's still pretty aggressive to change out, and I will explain that when we get to the recommendations. So again, the financial studies or financial plan or section is a good resource. Unfortunately, it has a few things that it makes it hard to go through the document. So the first one is there's one paragraph in the utility section, and in the financial plan, that talks about utility fund structure and transfers. And it doesn't really explain the funds or the transfers. And that's one of the things I think to most of the committee is very confusing. I think after 2 years, we're almost there, understanding what the utility fund is made up of, the administration of the utility fund, and which is laid out into 3 different funds, and also the transfers. But it's still confusing when it says, okay, this is transferred, exactly what are we transferring it from and to? It just says transfers. So we're almost there, but not quite, but this document doesn't tell us, and that would have been helpful for everybody to have a better understanding. Another problem we have is the unrestricted and the restricted and unrestricted funds. The restricted reserve explanations are good. It's very helpful to have that in the document. Unfortunately, the way they broke them out, they were trying to, if I understood them correctly, because they did explain that, and I believe they explained it in the report also, that they were trying to show that the cost related to each utility as far as electric, water, and stuff. But they broke out the emergency capital reserve. They broke out the rate stabilization reserve. And both of those are related to all of them. So you can't really say, well, I'm going to give you a few million here and a few million there. It's confusing. It makes it hard to follow that way. The unrestricted funds included the cash and the 20% of reserves for each utility. We brought that up in a couple meetings. We brought that up in our report. Again, when you're trying to decide if a rate needs to go up or down, I would believe that you would want to say, okay, I've got 20% of reserves already collected. I wouldn't want to get into that reserves unless I had to, unless there was emergency. So I wouldn't want to take that into consideration as a rate necessarily. In most cases, I would not. So by combining the unrestricted fund, the cash, and the reserves, it's not showing the true picture. All you have to do is just break the two apart, and then you can see it all, but it's cleaner. So that's one thing that was totally ignored when we asked to do it. In the draft, it was talked about their aspect of the transfers when they first talked about the franchise fee, the central fee, and a few things, and they said that the finance had conducted a review and that everything, the types of transfers which are appropriate. And I'm not sure it was stated it was appropriate. It was more, so this was not in the final report. This was in the draft. But it was still sort of to the feel of the report. It was really more of what's allowable, not what was appropriate. So again, you get a flow through the report that they're not really looking at the history of Boulder City. They're looking at, well, this is what the country does, this is what some of the standards does, or something, but it didn't feel like it was really related as much to Boulder City as it should be. So that was the reason I bring that up. And then they did state it. They stated that, so in the draft, it said, in addition, a proposal for a franchise fee equal to 5% of utility rate revenues has also been included, which will treat city utilities in a manner similar to private utilities. Why would we treat Boulder City like a private utility? So there again, that's not in the final, that was only in the draft, but I felt that it was still sort of felt like it went through the original, the final report. The capital improvement tables for each one, what they did is they laid out, they took the lease, the solar lease funds, the land funds, or anything associated that could be reduce the capital. They reduced the capital by that. So in the tables, and we can show that, it's tables, I believe, 15 through 17, I believe. They show the capital and they show how each one is broken out. Each is, for instance, it was like $18 million, I think, under this report. And it was reduced down to $17 million because of what was coming into it, which is okay, but the problem is it's done in one table, and then that 17 million goes forward. And you never understand unless you looked at that one table that originally you have $18 million of budgeted, not just been reduced. So that was another thing we asked can you please show it all? Because when you go to the cash flows, I'd want to see as much as possible in the cash flow, because again, it's a very good resource, really understanding what's going on, how each one is flowing and how it flows into the overall account for all the utilities is very helpful. But when you don't have all the data at the end, it means you have to go someplace else to understand what's going on, and that it's not helpful. So those are things that were troublesome when you try to read through it. And again, as a resource, the report, as a reference material and a resource, it's helpful. But to say I'm just going to go down through the recommendations and do the recommendations, that's what we had a hard problem with, is we didn't see that the data really helped us to say these recommendations are what we want to do. So again, I guess just to reiterate, the cost of service, which is really a big portion of the report, and later I'll be happy to say more about it if we can go through it. But I have a hard time digesting all of it and trying to figure out what's going on, and I got to go back to the spreadsheets and find the data that it goes to, because it uses I think plant. I don't know. Do you remember, Dennis? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and I should have looked at it. But anyway, it's a general term that they use that's part of the spreadsheet. I didn't allow you to answer the question.
You're referring to the plant investments?
But there's a general term that they use. It's not just, but I think it's a general plant or something like that. But the way it's broken out is again, it was never discussed. And you can only find that if you go to the spreadsheets. You can't find it in the report. So it makes it, and it is over 50 spreadsheets in that workbook. But again, it's a great resource. I really appreciate having all that data. It's just a little hard to go through. And the one option seemed to be based more on a mathematical aspect, dealing with demand. And again, by not really having our input or saying something about it, it just didn't seem to have the right historical aspect for Boulder City. I guess if they would have said, hey, Boulder City does this way, we originally built the different structure this way, then the intent, and then went through it, then I could understand it, but it was never discussed that way. So it's harder to go through, and that's hopefully what we can do in the future, is understand the history of Boulder City more to get an understanding of what should or shouldn't be done. The rate design portion, really, and I can't remember if they stated in the back, or is really a rate recommendations. There's no design discussion, and the rate recommendation portion of the study is really is quite similar to the executive summary. So there isn't that much extra data there to be helpful with it. So I think that's my general feel of the report. Again, I apologize if I got a little strong with it. I was just trying to point out some major facts. Greg or Eileen, did you have any comments relating to the general feel of the report? Greg?
Excuse me, the UAC committee still has some more work to do on that final report. There's some serious, and I feel very grievous, miscalculations on water cost, service cost for large utility customers. That has to be addressed. I felt that I strongly was opposed to Raftelis's recommendation of the rejection chart they had. It was going to be too drastic a cut. So we're going to look at what Boulder City has done through history as to the commercial rates and how they got to where they're at. And we're talking about the idea of installing 2 more lower flow thresholds, like from 0 to 60,000 gallons. We'd like to take and reduce that a little bit to where we get a water conservation facet or asset into the commercial industrial rates. Okay, there's also some peculiarities in the thing to where, like, what comes to my mind that I've talked about, and you're all aware of it, is the water store. The water store will use X number of thousand gallons a month at the water store, but it doesn't all go down the sewer. It gets sold as a commodity to the customers. Are we adjusting that customer for that service? I don't know. I haven't been able to dig deep enough. There's other things that are being done that it's like, wait a minute. You have what I consider water wasters that can be done more efficiently, but if you're charged the same flat rate for 0 to 60,000 gallons on a commercial customer, your residential customer has a 0 to 7,000 or 0 to $10,000 cutoff, and then it goes to the next tier. There's a disparity there. So we have to look at that. Because of COVID-19, we ran out of time. We couldn't do it in the time constraints we had. But those are things I'd like to address in my next tenure that I have with the committee and get it straightened out, because we'd like to bring business in here. If we don't take and act favorably towards business, we're not going to get business in here. So, we do have an upper hand. So that's one of the things I'd like to address. I like the progress we're making based upon we've gone through COVID. We've got our 69 kV lines being upgraded, our poles being upgraded. That's all going good. But there's some other things we have to catch. So part of that report and the funding in that report is paramount to what we're able to do for utilities, water, electric, sewer, and waste, trash. So that's what I'd like to work on this next go around.
Daniel, did you have a chance to review the report or have any comments on it at all? I'll give you an opportunity to speak if you have some comments.
I do defer to the committee. My only concerns is the actual infrastructure. It seems like a short time to actually evaluate if the capital expenditures for the future projections are accurate. I know just the city of Las Vegas, we're a decade behind. We're still behind from the last recession. So I'm wondering if the actual capital costs for the future are accurate and the current projects are going as planned, as I'm worried about giving money away before actually ensuring that capital expenditures are accounted for. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, so does anybody in the council have any questions that we can answer?
I'd like to start out by saying, I understand what Mr. Todd is referring to, and Mr. Combs as well, but I think that Mr. Carr brought that out. We need to look at this municipal system as just that, a municipal system. We're not trying to please shareholders or any of that, but we do have to be responsible to make sure that we do have enough money coming in to do the capital projects. And again, I think if you look over the past 2 or 3 years, we've probably spent more on capital in the last 2 or 3 years than the city is the ratepayers. So if we say that the city has to pay more, then that means the ratepayers are going to get less out of what they have as far as city revenue goes. As far as the commercial rates go, we have kind of an odd setup on our electric here. We get about half of our power from Hoover Dam at a very inexpensive cost. And if we have commercial customers that push us past the amount of power we get from Hoover, then we have to go out on the open market and buy power at a much higher cost. So, when we talk about these things, cost of service, again, I think Mr. Carr brought that out. We need to be very careful about what we're saying, who is causing these costs to go up. Is it the person in the 3-bedroom home here in Boulder City, or is it a commercial customer that has a power-intensive business? So those are all things that I think need to be factored in. I don't understand all the nuances between some of the descriptions that Mr. Carr had as far as rate designs, but is that something the committee should look at? It certainly sounds like it. As far as some of the other specifics with regard to that, the franchise fee, I think that went absolutely nowhere with the city council. For us to charge our ratepayers money for stuff they already own and then transfer that into the general fund makes no sense whatsoever. We do need to take a look at our administrative costs. How is that being calculated? But we also need to take into account, I believe, whether we are getting additional revenue in the form of land leases that may absorb some of those administrative costs so that we can keep the utility rates as low as possible. So with the administrative transfers, I think we need to look at very, very carefully, because we seem to have money going from the general fund to the utility fund and from the utility fund back to the general fund. What is happening? What is all that money for? And once again, the goal should be to benefit the ratepayers. So if we can find ways to benefit the ratepayers, that's, I think, what our primary goal should be as far as those costs go. The capital fund, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that I want to be very careful about making sure we get done the critical things that need to be done, but we look at a longer horizon as far as everything that could be done or that would be beneficial to be done without putting too much of a burden on the current ratepayers. So if we can look at a longer horizon for some projects, that seems to be a goal that I would like to see pursued. Water, it's been in the news quite a bit these last couple of weeks. The legislature just passed a bill about removing what they consider to be non-functional grass. I know the city is pursuing that through other departments. It's not necessarily something the utility department is dealing with, but water's a big factor here. From what I saw in the news, Hemingway Harbor was closed for Memorial Day weekend. You were not able to launch a boat at Hemingway Harbor because of the drop in the lake level. If you wanted to launch a boat, you had to go over to Echo Bay or Colville Bay. So if that's not, an indication that we've got a water issue, we've got a water issue. And I think that our system needs to be looked at in that case. What can we do? Can we do anything with reusing our wastewater, with finding other ways to perhaps separate out the streams that go into the wastewater system, further conditioning the water for reuse after it does get into the wastewater system. It doesn't rain here often, but when it does, it can rain hard. Is there any way to look at that storm runoff that gets produced during that period? Our golf courses, our parks, how can we look at those for reducing water consumption, I think is going to be very important. The electric system, as I mentioned, we get about half our power from Hoover Dam. I think that still is correct. What can we do with regard to solar energy? We are in agreements now, I believe, on our last 2 projects where we have written into those contracts the ability to purchase power from those producers at a slightly lower level than we do on the open market. Is there more that we can do as a community regarding solar? I think that is also going to be important to look at here over the next few years. I think those are my main points. Anyone else? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. Along those same lines of what you were talking about, it's obvious water is the biggest issue, and it's certainly something that I think needs to be looked at. When we talk about electricity and we talk about the dam, that comes from the water that's available. So, sure, the usage that the water that Boulder City uses maybe perhaps is not going to be the biggest dent in that, but we still need to be doing everything that we can to conserve and to make sure that we are being good stewards here in this area. I guess I am just echoing the mayor here, but also looking into potential solar options. I hear all the time from people, I wanted to do solar on my roof, but it's not affordable. It's not affordable. It's just cheaper for me to continue doing it this way. How is that possible? So I'm not sure what those answers are, and I don't know how we have to start looking at this to make ourselves more conscious and more aware of how we're where we're getting our power from, the water that we're using, where is it going, how is it being used. Those are the things that I think we really need to tackle at kind of the big picture, and just to start to get a game plan in moving forward, and where are the areas of the greatest concern. I think that's where we have to start, where the areas of greatest concern, and then start to we can start to get more pinpointed as we move forward and figure that out. But that's where my head is at.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to address some of the things that Mr. Carr addressed. Make sure that if I have them incorrect, let me know. But I think you're saying that you accept the report as written. However, you did not think it was specific to Boulder City. It lacked the history. The communications was poor. It's lacking footnotes or references so you can follow without having to dig for your information. Some areas were not covered. The reserves should not be used, and I totally agree, because that's what the word reserves means, to reserve it in case of need. And then I guess the committee expressed their concerns, and did you express that to Reftilis, or how did you express that, and did you get a response?
I'll answer, then if anybody else has any additional comments. So our concerns we expressed through the draft. And so that's where we have the two documents. If we need to bring it up today, we do have it. We sent, a city sent on our behalf a red line strikeout with comments to Reftilis. So we took the, let's see, I believe it was on the 16th of December. We met the committee, and we had a draft that was in the packet, and with comments in it. And we went through all the comments and asked if there was additional comments, additional red line strikeouts, what was needed and what we believed was important. And like I said, that was the one where Reftilis was available on the phone to go over that. So they were available to meet with us. We declined it. So that was our call, not theirs, to make it that clear. But we did not get any feedback. I don't believe, Dennis, we just got the final report. There was no letter or anything from them saying anything else.
That's correct. I think they, at that point in time, just used their professional judgment on which comments they should respond to and which comments they should not respond to.
Okay. Then as far as the overall part of the report, once everybody gets the aspect report, if we can go over the recommendations, then I can sort of explain, or we can explain what we feel is good and or might not be so good. My problem is I'm a little leery of this being said, well, it's a good report, it's put on a shelf, 3 years down the road it's pulled off and somebody wants to do the recommendations. That's what I would like to see avoided. So if that helps what you're saying.
Thank you. So you would not recommend that we use this company again?
I guess we'd have to ask. I was disappointed in the beginning. I felt we was going along well, but something changed in between. Part of it was COVID, but there was an extent where we were not getting the feedback that we asked for. At one point, it was, so sorry to make a short story long. I was very upset in that actually Eileen, or committee member, asked about the cost of service issue in one of the meetings. One of the main members of the consulting group said, "We'll go back to the video and review it. We explained it there." So I did. I went back to the video. It did not explain it. We had asked several questions, and I think most, if not all, the questions had not been answered at that time. So it sort of went downhill from that point. So if it's going to be that aspect, and it is in the scope of work that we are to be a major contributor to the report, I did not feel we were a major contributor to the report. So at that part, it would be probably no. But that would be my opinion, not the committee's.
So does the committee have, would they make some recommendations for the next time this happens, or is that too long to discuss today?
Well, I think at the end, if we go in the recommendations, that would probably be a good idea. But as Greg had pointed out, I think we're still trying to go over it. There is so much data here. We're trying to be, trying to do the right thing and trying to explain it right. And like I said, that's how I did it at the beginning. I didn't want to be emotional about it and have any, saying that it was my opinion or that, I felt slighted. So I was going after somebody. I'm not trying to do it on emotion. I'm trying to do it on facts, on how it was laid out. So I think the more we review it and the more we understand, then we can say, this works, this doesn't. And that's one thing that our intent was to try to write up some report that we could give you. And I guess at the end of the day, if you feel that we've answered enough questions, do you want a report from us or do you not need it? That's where we are trying to get to, because there is so much data there. That's what we were trying to do our last meeting in May 5th, our workshop that didn't go too well, that we were trying to go through and say, okay, here's the tables. What can we get out of them? What can we get out of the report? And we still have to do that. So, but I think what we would like to do, and has been brought up by many committees, is that we would like to understand the history of Boulder City. We would like to get that out. We would like to understand more the rate processes and stuff like that. One of the major issues of a rate process for this aspect, and I guess mostly any city, is that you've got so many different components that come into your revenue source. So to figure out what the revenue is going to be, the spreadsheet has it, but it's still, whether this committee is well qualified to do that. I think we have enough expertise on the committee to do it. And I think for next year, that's what we were hoping to do, is we can get an idea. So through the city and using Raftilis' spreadsheet, if we understand correctly, that would be a great starting point. And then we can go through more information and use this report too. So just keep moving forward, but not necessarily saying that we can go. I think we all agree that the cost of service study is definitely too drastic. And so, and as we go through if we go down through those recommendations, we can explain that.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the committee for all that you've done. It is very difficult and very in-depth, and I do appreciate all that you've done. I'm sorry that you've had the things, well, we couldn't do much about COVID, but there were other issues with this, and I'm sorry that happened. And I do appreciate you being so compassionate, because it does show that you care. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my brain was wrapped around numbers, and then I was, I want to thank you all for your hard work in going over this, and like was said, your passion about this. I did get the sense in reading this, as much as I read of it, the sort of the loss of who we are as Boulder City and having our own utility. And what do we pay ourselves? The whole idea of the what the government, what the city pays for utilities, and that we buy wholesale and then we sell it to ourselves retail, and it comes out of the same money. Whether that, if we're talking about a couple dollars per 1,000 gallons, okay, so we're paying ourselves back, or we're taking the money out. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense. I also see this as a living document, a floating document. Sitting on SNWA's board, there's a consideration that we are in a 20-year drought. that we've got serious water issues coming up, that we have a 70% chance of being at 1,050 in the lake by 2026. And that, oddly enough, during the pandemic, even though the hotels and motels were not using water, overall the city used, the whole area, the valley, used almost 20% more water than they did last year. Boulder City used almost 10% more water than it did. And so these rates are based on water usage remaining constant, or maybe even going down, say, hey, we got it, we're in a drought, use less water. We use 10% more. And then what's going to happen is it could be a big drop. So I'd like to see almost like under these critical conditions, these are the options. This is where we are with, with our rates today. And where do we go forward from this under these contingencies? Because at some point, I don't want to be a Chicken Little, but at some point we reach dead pool. At some point, our utility, our electric rates go up. We're buying more on the market. So, like I said, I'd like to see this also have more contingency options of how we're going to deal with these things going forward. There's no projection of getting out of this drought in the near future. So those were my thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Carr?
You're exactly right, and actually George Ree was one of the ones that was looking at a lot of the contingencies, and so there are a lot to be said about it. I think, to be fair to Raftillus, I'm not sure it was really in their scope of work to be a major contingency. So that's what I'm trying to be fair overall with all the aspects of the report and everything. So, but basically you might want to look at it as, okay, here is a normal rate process, and here's what we're looking at, and here are some risk factors that we need to take into consideration. And we've all agreed to that. We just need to find a way to do it. But the more we understand, then the more we can contemplate that. So just to make sure and try to be fair.
Oh yeah, I wasn't critical of Raftillus. I was just sort of saying in a perfect world, this is a document that has contingency plans.
Right.
Thank you.
And that's the one thing so as we go through the recommendations, we'll go through it, but several people have talked, and we have two great resources, Greg Todd and Ned Shamu, that probably say it wrong, apologize, that have been in the business forever, and so have a great knowledge, and they've already helped a lot. They've helped with the 5-year plan, they've helped with the 10-year plan, and as far as the capital improvements, and we're hoping to go further. So a lot of this stuff, so as the report and then our next agenda item, we'll be able to go into more detail on some of the things and what we're asking you for help on and stuff like that. So, but anyway, go on. But we can do a little bit more with the recommendations.
There is another factor that we're going to be looking at over the next couple of years, and that is the American Rescue Plan. Boulder City has been designated to receive $14 million. That's not all for infrastructure, but a significant portion of that is. So where are we going to be able to use that? We still have not received the full set of guidelines from the federal government, but we will be getting half that money, or $7 million here this year, and certainly part of that is intended for infrastructure. So what does that mean for us? And that may be an opportunity to do some of these community solar projects. In some ways, I'm happy to hear when a homeowner says, well, it doesn't make sense for me to go to rooftop solar. That means we're providing a good value for our electric service. But are there things we can do as a community in regard to solar? And again, in talking to our solar partners out there, there's some break point in solar where we go from getting something like parking cover installation that has solar panels on it to a system that we can't just plug into our existing grid. So I think those are things that we can look at here very closely over the next couple of years to see how we can put that money to work where it will benefit us for an extended period of time. So once we know how much money we can spend on projects, we can then start looking at those projects. But as we look at the committee, the work that they do over the next couple of years, this American Rescue Plan money needs to factor in there somewhere as far as the type of infrastructure needs that we have. So that is a real benefit for our community to be able to get that money, and we certainly need to spend it wisely, but how does that fit in with our capital spending plan?
The other two comments related to all this too is that I think a good way to state that it's a living document is a good way to look at it. So we can take it as a reference, as it's been stated, look at what information we do have, and then go forward with that, but saying, okay, we need to tweak this, we need to tweak that to make sure that we're understanding it. The aspect of we're all having problems with conservation and at cost. And I think we've all stated in the committee we've concerns, and I think everybody is saying we're trying to help somebody on a budget. So if somebody is a limited budget and can only afford so much, then as a municipality at cost, we should be only charging at cost. And so when we get to the recommendations, I want to harp on that. That's what the $10 was meant to do. It's at cost. It's the service cost. It's not the rate cost. And that's another thing we'd like to look at is, okay, let's look at the cost of water. So if somebody can determine what is an average home, is it the 8,000 range or something like that, then let's look at what the cost is of that water, and then we look at escalating up more. So, it's at $2 and something now. Maybe we go down to $1 something, because that's really what the cost of it is, and then we ratchet it up more for conservation. So again, we're really trying to find help for somebody on a budget, and we're municipality at cost. So how do we work the at cost and the conservation in at the same time? So those are things. But we have a lot of people on the committee. Eileen has a lot of experience from Oregon and other areas. So we have a lot of information. We have several other people on it that we've got a lot of good experience right now that we really want to put to work and try to understand. And so that's what we're hoping for now is we greatly appreciate, so I'm going to go off track just a tad bit, is Dennis, all the presentations and all the information you've given us over. But that's one thing we want to do now is do more workshops and try to really work some of this out. Thank you.
Anyone else? Again, I think we have just finished our budget process, so that our budget for the next fiscal year has been determined. Budgets are changeable, but the reason you have a budget is so you have some idea of what you're going to spend your money on in the coming year. With that being said, and in regard to this report, they talk about things like entering into accelerated payments on the raw water debt. That certainly is desirable, I believe, to pay off any debt we may have, but we've already refinanced that debt to pay a lower interest rate. And is it better for us to accelerate payments on that, or is it better for us to do capital projects? So I think that's something we need to take a look at as well. Where's that decision get made? I don't think we have to make that decision, immediately, but that time is coming when those bonds are eligible for being paid off faster than what the requirement is right now on them.
Well, I'm sorry, do you?
Yep.
Bring up I think if we can bring up the final report, do you have that available, Holly, on page 4? And if we can just sort of read through the recommendations, would that be okay? Because I think that will give the feel for that's the Word doc. Yeah, should be page 4 at the very top. Or you can look at the recommendations on the bottom. I guess the recommendations on the bottom page are pretty much, I think, are almost exactly the same thing as the top. Okay, yeah, there we go. Down. I think that's, was that it, or did I miss it? I think, go back, Holly. Keep going. Whoop, 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 stop. Right there. Let's start with right there. Okay, so the first one is to reduce the energy rate by 3%. So that's the one thing that we agreed, or most of the committee agreed, that there was enough information in the financial section that we could agree that 3% was doable. We all agreed that we didn't know if 3% was the total amount, but we agreed that it was doable. So with the information that we currently had, then we agreed with the 3%, but we also said that we want to go further on, and that is part of the resolution, is that the committee looks at the any rate adjustments every year. So that's what we're hoping to do, is to find out how it could be done. So at the same time, if we can look at the history and we can find that maybe the commercial, maybe there needs to be some adjustment made, maybe we can make that in with any additional adjustment that can be done, and that's what we would like to look at. So we made our recommendation for 1A, but we're also saying that we'd like to continue to look at that. So anything else on 1A that I missed from the committee? Okay, 1B, it was staying to keep the monthly payment the same, which would be $10 for electrical, and I think we all agreed that that was easy to do. Can we bring that back up? Thank you. And then the 1C, the phase in the cost of service, that's one thing I don't think, we originally said that we needed more information, but I think that most of the committee agrees that we don't believe that should be done at all in the near future, especially reduce, because what that does is it wants to increase the residential. If the city pays, if I'm off the top of my head correctly, if the city pays the wholesale rate, it's a 16% increase to the residential amount, and I think it's an 18%. Make sure I'm thinking water or energy, but anyway, it's a good percent to the residents and a really drastic amount to the reduction for the commercial. So that part, I believe that most of the committee agreed that, if not all the committee in that one, agreed that we could not support that. So we definitely would not recommend what they recommended for the cost of service and to phase in a drastic amount over a 4-year period. So we would like to look at it and see if there is something to relate it to the cost of service, but I think our concept of Boulder City and their concept that I think a lot of us are saying are the same thing. So it definitely needs to be re-looked at. Any questions on the electrical portion of the recommendation?
Councilmember Bridges?
I have a question. It doesn't mean I'm interested in it, but if the city buys electricity and sells it to itself retail, and the city pays that bill, the difference between the wholesale rate and what the city would pay is paid from the general fund as opposed to the utility fund, correct? Just trying to wrap my mind around that.
So the wholesale rate is charged to, the golf courses, the parks, the cemetery, directly paid out of the general fund. And then same thing for electrical in those city facilities.
So it's paid out of the general fund to the provider, to the electrical provider, the water provider, right, as opposed to as the...
Right. So an easy example is the golf course. The golf course has a golf course water budget that they paid the wholesale rate on directly to the utility, which so we pass on because we pay that to the water authority.
Okay. So when we buy water to resell, we buy it at the wholesale rate, and it comes out of the utility fund, but that next drop of water that goes to the golf course, that comes out of the general fund.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to figure that out. Thank you.
So just to make it clear, though, I think it's, hopefully I'm not being Captain Obvious here, but so with the city paying the wholesale, then the utility rates, then the utility users have to pay for the infrastructure.
Right.
So, and I think, but most of us agree that that's the way it should be. It's at cost. There's really no reason for the city to pay for infrastructure because that they own. So even though we're all paying for it, it's still, it's the municipality, it's not for profit. So that's one thing we can try to, except if we need to talk and have time a little bit more today, the cost of service, but just, it's more of, I think most of us agreed that, especially electricity, you definitely would want to, it just should be the city should pay for what they use, not the major infrastructure. But the water, if you're looking at, the one thing that could be considered, and please don't stone me, but it's like the golf course, whether that would be something that would be looked at later, because that could be considered an enterprise fund, and once it did sort of support itself, then would that be, it's not an enterprise fund now, but if it was to a point where it supported itself, then maybe that would be something to be looked at that would be different. But for the lights here and all that, there's really no need for Boulder City to pay retail for that. So it's just one of these things. That's one thing the committee would like to keep reviewing, just to review. And that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to find facts so we can keep moving forward and try to get the right recommendations. Because we have no authority, we understand that, but we would like to be able to pass along good advice. Anything else on the electrical? Okay, so if we go and we look at the water utility, so Greg brought up, there's a couple things that Greg brought up that I'd like to bring up. So the first thing is that we debated this and we ran out of time. So what was debated and what was recommended and what was passed in the resolution was the $10 fee. So in this portion, and that is sort of the key difference between the executive summary and the other one, is that the executive summary doesn't clearly state that they're suggesting to reduce the $10 and let's see, okay, they are reduction later in the actual text. It doesn't say as much about larger reductions. But so we went with the $10 for everything, and as if most people have seen, you look at a 12-inch water meter is about $3,000 a month, $3,000 plus, and so Raftillis had used a standard, and in some cases, I think they were reducing it as much as almost $1,000, or by the time it got to the 12, I think it was $1,000 a month. So with the short time we had, we were saying that, again, it looked like it was too drastic of a cut, and we'd try to find a way that we could, so using the standard, as Dennis had pointed out in our meetings, that's a proper way to go. So again, we can't fault them for the way they did that. It's just, again, is that really what we want to do right away? So that's the thing. We didn't have enough time in the meetings to get it out for July 1st to get everything done by July 1st. So we recommended the $10. That's what the city council approved, was the $10 reduction. But just to make sure everybody understands, that's $10 all the way through 12 inches. And when you only reduced it, the $3,000 bill by $10. And so we are hoping to get to that again in the future, in the near future, and see if if the city agrees. Of course, this is just a recommendation that we would hope that maybe next year we could suggest something for the next year's budget water service reduction in some of the meters. But we need more information and discussion. So the equalization of the residential and the commercial, I'm not sure if we fully got to that one or not. I think that was trying to get to the point where all the meters were the same, whether they were residential or commercial. And so again, everything was $10. So essentially, we did the reduction the same. We just need to figure out is the rate the same? So we need to look at that to be probably a little closer. To maintain the let's see, monthly fixed charge. So the way believe they were saying, once we change the fixed charge, then we would no longer go forward with it more, is what their 2C was indicating. We're saying we do need to review it. We only reduced it. It was only reduced by $10, and it needs to be reviewed. So 2C would have to be looked at in more further detail. 2D is, and actually just to make sure it's totally clear, is the water reduction was based on in a major part of the city paying retail. And so if the city doesn't pay retail, there was a major shift. And there was, I think, only one or two parts that was explained that way, so it was not as clear to see what all was going on. So again, please let me know if this committee disagrees, but I believe most of the committee, if not all the committee, did not agree with 2D at all. So we do not believe that the cost of service should be allocated or adjusted over the next 4 years, or at any of those cost of service at this point. So is there any questions on the water utility?
I would just have the comment that, again, when we talk about commercial accounts and how does that compare with residential, the infrastructure that needs to be in place for a commercial account is often significantly more than what it is for residential. So, where you may have a 4 or 6 inch water line for an entire residential neighborhood, maybe you're providing 1 10-inch line for a single customer. So I also have trouble when I see statements like this about the cost of service. What is the cost of service? Even in the case of the water store, they may be paying more than others for their wastewater portion of the charge, but their demand on the freshwater infrastructure is that much greater because that's what their business is. So how do we look at these trade-offs? I'm not so sure. Mr. Todd?
I need about $1.5 million of that federal money, and I'll save you a million gallons of domestic potable water a day. If you give me that, I'll convert the golf course, the old Muni course, onto raw water, and that'll save you 25% of their bill, which the citizens are paying. And we now get 1 million gallons a day of potable water into our system. Okay, we've got the raw to do it. We just need the capital to put the water lines in the golf course to bring it back to their system. And then you'll see a big change. But what I was looking right now, and I don't have it yet because there's just too many pages in here, but just off the top of my head, an 8-inch water main service charge was $1,800 a month. Okay, they were talking about bringing it down to $800 a month in the Raftillis report. That's too severe, too drastic. Okay, so yeah, there are consumers, but the thing is we found, and this was really tight, and Dennis was there, we were all there, but we found some inconsistencies in our resolutions for our water charges. Like, for example, there's some fourplexes in town that have 1 water meter, but the customers and the renters are getting 4 individual service charges on the 1 water meter. That is not right, okay? And yet the owner of the property pays for a service charge on the water meter also. So that is unjust enrichment from the city water side to be able to collect 5 service charges on 1 water meter. We ran out of time to investigate it because we had to get a report in. So that's why I wanted to take and continue on some of these things that were left open. And they're very glaring problems that we have to correct. And Larry has done a lot of back history research, and we found out it was just monkey see, monkey do, monkey see, monkey do all through the years. And when you guys all came on staff and you said, no, we're holding a rate freeze, smartest thing in the world, because boy, we'd have had to give them an 8% reduction on utilities.
Yeah, we shouldn't be collecting any more than we need.
That's correct, sure. And that's what the whole basis of the UAC is to get it back under control. We had a train running down the tracks, and we were the guys that threw the quarters on the tracks to slow the train down because it was getting out of hand. So there are some things that I'm really passionate about and that I see that's not correct that we have to get fixed, but we've got a little breathing room. We pulled the relief valve, we got a little pressure off the tank, and we're able to go back and start going after it again, and that's what we want to do.
Absolutely.
And also on the water, the one thing that Greg had brought up earlier was that, so as an example, what we want to do, a lot of these things, again, we're trying to understand it first, and then once we understand it, then we'll give a recommendation, and whatever everybody agrees is the right thing to do. But right now, for example, the water, you have 0 to 8K of 1,000 gallons of water for residential, and you have the first for commercial is 0 to 60. So that's one thing that might be easily done, is maybe you just take the residential and you add that to the commercial. So you have 0 to 8 and 25 to 60, and that just add that extra amount. So if you've got somebody that, Greg had brought it up, you've got a mechanical shop that's got a toilet and some water, and maybe it depends, they might use some extra water, but they don't use that much water. So they only use up to the 8,000 or even the first. Why do they have to pay the amount for the 60? So the rate is similar to what the residentials pay. So you look at, well, is it really out of whack? But they aren't given the chance to pay for less amount. So those are things that we'd like to look at and do too, is just sort of recommendations that could be added to resolutions in the future. So the wastewater, we were doing our best to go through the energy, the electrical, and the water. So I honestly am not sure that I've completely got to the point that the wastewater was. Is I believe the commercial and the residents are paying a flat rate. Dennis, is that correct?
That's correct. Residential plus.
And so they're talking about trying to have a different rate for the commercial. So that was, and I'm not sure exactly where in the report that's clearly stated. Dennis, do you understand that?
Yeah, so it is stated in the report, and all they're really recommending is instead of it being based on the tiered usage for water usage, it would just be one uniform rate. So it's really just a simpler way to do it, but it's an option because it's revenue neutral. It wasn't intended to raise additional revenue or reduce revenue. It was just a revenue neutral option that they recommended, but doesn't have to be done.
Thank you, because we didn't really have time to go into that one in detail, and I guess we just look at the facts to make sure we understand the amount of water they're talking about and what type of rates would be different. So I think that's the major recommendations, but as we've stated before, the major part of this report is based on cost of service, which if not all the committee does not, most if not all the committee does not agree that we can just sign off on the cost of service. We have a lot of questions with that. So as it's been stated here, a living document, so we don't want to reduce the rate 1 year and then increase it to just another year anyway. That's what their suggestion was for the residential aspect. Commercial would go down, the residential would go up. So we're hoping to have some suggestions for next year. We believe that there's enough revenue source in some of this. For instance, I believe that the water amount that was budgeted for the revenue for fiscal year 22 was based on Raftillis. And they were basing it on the extreme reduction. It was a 14%. So with $10 being reduced instead of up to almost 1,000. Now again, it was a smaller amount of meters, but I believe a 2-inch line was still it was several hundred. No, I guess it was 100 or something per meter. It was a reasonable amount of reduction still, even the 2-inch line, which is your more popular line. So I think we should have some extra money there. So then that's the next thing we can look at is, okay, where's the best place to put the money? Is it in debt reduction? Again, the debt reduction, the raw water doesn't necessarily serve the whole city. It serves certain aspects. So that's one thing we need to work with the city more so we have better understandings. And I think we've said at the same time, could some solar lease money go a little bit to that and not necessarily to the ratepayers? Or if we have a big windfall, maybe that's not the best word to say, in the water revenue, for instance, if we do have a big revenue increase this year because we don't have as much reduction as we thought, we've budgeted for a certain amount, the rate is still kept the same, then maybe we would have some to put in towards that too. So that's why it's very important, and I greatly appreciate the city showing the breakdown in the city manager's report and showing how each utility, the available cash, that helps drastically to understand where we're at. So how much money do we have that's available cash, not the reserves, and what can it go for towards capital, and what can it go for towards other things? And you can see that, okay, I've got a large amount of money, I don't need to reduce, I don't want to necessarily reduce my rate to get into that money, but I want to make sure what's at. So we need to understand what capital projects we are, and that's one thing that we're trying to do as a committee is we're trying to have it on every agenda item is ongoing capital and stuff like that. And Dennis and the city has done a great, and appreciate all the help they're doing with that on that. And we're just continuing to go through that so we can get the best ideas that we can. I'm trying to think if anybody else is, so on this overall report, Eileen, do you have any comments or anything to help sort of round out the report issue, the overall report?
No comments on the overall report. There were several issues where we felt there was incorrect information. So just one example where they used a population estimate on page 13 of 15,977, and they said they got that from the U.S. Census American Communities Survey, but it doesn't match that amount. It doesn't match the amount that the city's website says. So there's just numbers in there. We don't know where they got them, and they don't match anything that we can find. So I do have some concerns with the accuracy of some of the data.
I was looking for it just for reference. Raftelis report for commercial potable on a 2-inch meter, we're currently charging $185.46. With the $10 reduction, it's $175.46. They recommended we drop it to $88.21, so that's a drop of $100 a month. Okay, and that's on a 2-inch meter. Now you're all sitting down, so I can read this one to you. Okay, an 8-inch meter right now is $2,136.49 minus 10, so that's $2,126.49. They wanted to drop that down to $822. So this is the problem we're having. In other words, I understand that demand and the service and everything else is correct on getting the water to the consumer, industrial, commercial, okay, but being an individual that buys this stuff retail, not wholesale, but retail, the charges every month are exorbitant. And this is what's driving people not to be able to keep businesses in Boulder City, and it needs a thorough review. I mean, the charges they've got here, usage 0 to 60,000 gallons is $2.75 to 79 cents per 1,000 gallons. So that's 0 to 60. You go into the residential, it's $2.39 per 1,000 gallons, and then at 8,001 gallons, it goes to $2.50. Well, usage over 60,000 gallons residential is the highest denominator we have in residential, but on commercial it starts at 60 and goes up from there. So we need to do some adjustments on our water charge for the actual product and really look hard at it as to what the average bill and what they're using. Because if they just got a sink wide open just to run water down the sink, that's not practical. And then the charges as you go up, and the 12-inch meter, which I heard, Dennis, don't we have a couple 12-inchers? I believe so. Yeah, well, they're $3,669 every month for the service charge of their water meter, okay? And then Raftelis' recommendation is to drop to $1,362. Those are big percentages. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to look at that as what is our cost of service, not the technical term, but what are we paying or what are we having to put into that business lot or whatever, and how many calls have we had for service? We have to become a little more practical and realistic on it. And I do believe in a little 20% for cost of living, cost of increase of material and stuff like this. But these numbers, these guys are getting hit, and gals, whoever owns a commercial business, potable, you know, they run from $185 to $36.69 a month every 30 days. That's what we're looking at on the next go around. And then the other thing is, like I just mentioned, was the one water meter to a fourplex, and they're getting 5 times the monthly bill. That's unjust enrichment for one water meter. And it's probably only a 1 inch. I haven't checked it, but there's several places like that. And we are small enough that we can keep track of this stuff and get it under control towards not just an automatic rate increase every year just because. So we have to look at it reactively and also in real time.
I think too, and I appreciate your input on that, Mr. Todd, and I think, you know, where we need to start looking at it is how do we promote conservation rather than just billing someone. So, you know, if there's a commercial user who maybe only uses 10,000, 20,000, well, you know, they're way different on demand than somebody who might be at that 60,000 gallons a month. And we're at a point where, as you say, if you want to brush your teeth with the sink running, with the faucet running, well, you know, maybe you ought to see those dollars going down the sink with that water and start paying for that. So we're going to have to really take a look at our rates where we promote conservation and not just we're billing somebody because we bill them for it. And as far as the fourplexes, you know, what is the solution? Well, it's probably going to be money up front and ask them to put a meter in for each unit that they have there so that they are billed properly for it.
Or take the bill they get for the owner of the parcel and divide it into fourplexes and send them a bill for the water. But here's the thing we need to do. I agree with the conservation, but I think we need to start pushing it out on our mailers, okay? Everybody in this town, I have not found anybody, myself included, has bottled water at the house. So take and look at what Sparklets is charging for a 5-gallon bottle of water, and then you're getting 1,000 gallons for right now the current price residential of $2.39.
And that's 1,000 gallons.
And 1,000 gallons. Now multiply or divide however you want to do it, and then come up with what your water bill is going to be if you start having to tote water into the house. Start saving it, everybody.
Well, and again, I think something that we can do as a community is get the word out. You know, here's what an average user residential user has. And let people know, you know, if you're using 20,000 gallons a month, you know, take a look at what it is that you're doing. Are your sprinklers running down the gutter each night? Are you running water in the house that doesn't need to be run? All of those types of things need to be looked at. And our pricing should reflect that. You know, are you conserving or are you putting greater strain on our system? Any other thoughts on that? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. So when council met with this group, they initially had proposed that we do the 3% reduction in the utility rates and then over the years bring those rates back up again and give a slight increase in those rate charges over the years, like the next 5 or 6 years. So I have a question. I don't know if Holly could bring up the report again. If you could go up to page 2, there's a graph. So on the, keep going, keep going. This one there, Holly, that gray one. So this is the draft number where this is our revenues, our operation, our unrestricted fund balance. And over the next, till fiscal year 26, there you can see the darker color is what would we, with our reduced revenues, suggested reduction, we would be down to about 60% of the revenues in 26. But in the final draft, which in our packets, page 91, in fiscal year 2026, it's at 108%. So what happened between the draft and the final with those revenues? Because the suggestions that I saw on there looked very similar in the draft versus the final. Does anyone know?
I can comment a little bit, and then it looks like Eileen has a comment, and then maybe Dennis. But I think that's part of our problem with this report, is that I'm not sure it was consistent. And part of it was due to, we have the unrestricted, but I think they kept the unrestricted consistent. So it was available cash and the reserves, which is hard to get at. So the 8%, I have to go back, maybe we should pull that up and see the 8% that you're looking at to make sure. Because what I was going to state is what's really helpful, if you look at tables 15 through 29, then you have the capital report, you have the cash flows for each individual one, and you have the combined cash flow. That's probably the better way to go through it. I don't necessarily trust these graphs, and so I'm not sure that the proper information got brought forward. I'm not positive, because that's one of the things I didn't have time to focus on. I was trying to get some of the, I looked at them going, this doesn't quite look right, and I didn't have time to go into it. So what was the page that you're looking at? So the final, because that should be the final report she has, I believe.
So on the, well, it's just on, in the electronic packet, it's page 91, but it's page 2 of, on mine it says it's page 2 of the final.
Oh, I see what you're saying, because it's, so, Eileen, do you have something, you had another comment, though, before we go on?
The difference is they removed the franchise fee.
So that money was going,
That money would have been going to general fund
and not
as a
staying in
franchise fee. So when they removed that, that brought the
money back into the accounts where it needs to stay. Okay.
Actually, it was a franchise fee, so thank you. It was franchise fee and the 0.4 for the central fee. It was originally, but that's still confusing, because in here it was 1.4, but it was related to the 1.025 central general administration fee.
Okay.
But it is in the budget for 1.3 because it's, I believe it's 250 or 300,000 for the it's not at risk, it's just, my head just went, but the insurance charge that they put into the general fees.
Okay.
So they're showing 1.25 going back to the general fund, as well as I guess it'd be 0.275 or better, or 300,000 for insurance costs.
Okay.
So that's the, again, yes, so the franchise fee was a major, but there was some additional part as far as the central fee.
Okay. And so I couldn't get through all of these graphs in the time we had. So, so initially they did have to raise because the funds by, 5 years from now were drastically getting lower, plus the capital improvement costs that we had, especially in electric, was pretty high over the next few years. And so, that was a suggested rate of, raising rates again later on to compensate. So without that franchise fee, is that still their suggestion to later raise those rates in the next 5 years? Did that make it to the final?
The increase in rates was to compensate for the franchise fee. And the Utility Advisory Committee didn't want to reduce rates and then turn around and increase them. So, yeah, I've kind of lost my train of thought. But
Well, to help you in that, what it was is the franchise fee, remember, was to pay for the city paying retail costs.
Right.
And so it wasn't, and then so you had two whammies. You had this franchise fee, you had an increased central fee, and you had a reduction in commercial. And so that's what was happening so it was like, okay, the funds, so if you go to the financial section and you say, here's the funds, here's what we need, even with capital and everything going, we're in great shape. So you can reduce by 3%, we're good to go. Now we go in and we do have the one hiccup, we have the financial fee, but we go to the cost of service. So actually we go down to the cost of service, which then takes us back to the financial, because once they go to cost of service and say the city should pay retail, they're going, where's that money going to come from? Mm-hmm. So they could decide they're going to do a franchise fee, charge the utility customers to pay for the general fund. So that didn't make any sense to us. And so you've got again combinations of things, and that's where you've got to be careful with taking this at face value, because there's a lot of issues in there that you've got to try to separate out and make sure you understand. we're all trying to make sure that we have all the pieces together ourselves, and we haven't had enough workshops to say, okay, I understand this, do you understand this, and how do we go forward? And that's why we have not been able to put a report together for this. And again, I greatly appreciate this time because it helps all of us to understand what we're doing. So does that make sense? Because you had the franchise fee and you had it. That was one thing that a lot of us said. It was very difficult to say, okay, reduce it in 3. And they were originally, they thought they were going to reduce it in 21. So they said, okay, 2 years, we'll increase it. So then once it was only a 1 year, then they decided to go to a 4-year instead of a 5-year in things. So there was just enough inconsistencies that it was frustrating, if nothing more.
Thank you. Well, and I agree. That was very confusing of why would we get this happy 3% reduction and then we'll just quietly later on raise those back up again so that's good to hear that that's been kind of removed with the franchise fee, that concern. So is the city paying retail currently on all utilities?
No.
Or no? That was just the suggestion to do. Okay.
Larry? There was a couple things we found in the report when we started digging into it, and one of them was what I call a cascading avalanche. If you decided to pull one thing out of the report and implement it, it triggered 3 other things. And it just wasn't set up the way we felt comfortable in doing it. One of the things we found is they couldn't even get the debt reduction chart correct. Okay, in the draft, it was just cut and paste right across the board. And I'm going, wait a minute, it doesn't show any reduction in our water debt. And they said, no, this is the way it is. And I said, no, it's not. You just took the left-hand column and moved it to the right and said, good to go. So there's a lot of things that you can't take at face value unless you take the time to read it. Mm-hmm. And my wife admonished me, and some people know her, she said, hey, you spent 100 hours or better reading these reports to where you can actually understand them, digest them, and sit at this the committee meetings and make sense of them. But some of the things are like, wait a minute, we still go back to the thing behind you, we're a municipality. We're not for profit, and everything that was driven in the Raftellus report was for profit. Now we have to go explain to the state of Nevada how come we got so much money coming in and we got no place to go with it. Because I know for a fact some of our major utility projects by 2026 will be done. There'll be a nail in it, it's done, it's not going to come back and haunt us. So yet we're still collecting large amounts of funds to do capital projects that we don't have to do. Now I know our substations, to give you a little highlight, so there's a gentleman in the back that's probably nodding his head. We're actually looking at the substation rebuilds that are going to happen.
It appears he's shaking his head, not nodding his head.
Okay, but there's some substation things that him and I are talking about that with what they're talking about, electric vehicles, okay, solar's not going to be the game, people, because you're going to charge your electric vehicles at night. Okay, now does the city of Boulder pay for a 2 gigawatt battery backup system for their facility? You know, these are all the problems. Our transformers in our stations aren't going to be able to handle the influx of electricity drawing off this thing. And the other thing, everybody loves solar, but the devil of solar is it has to be instantaneously replaced with a prime mover at any time solar stops. So Boulder City is now paying twice the amount for the same electricity. People don't talk about that on solar, okay? I like having utility grade solar. That puts the problem of getting it to us in somebody else's lap, okay? The thing is, if you put individual systems, it's great, but the problem is when it goes down or something happens with your system, Boulder City has to step up and supply 100% of what you need at a moment's notice. And the newest UAC member, he's seen power flow shift in generation. And it's real scary when all of a sudden the stuff's going the wrong direction and you're going, what the heck happened? Another station lost their generation and we had to pick up the slack. All that stuff has to be factored in when you start pushing solar in a small community like this. So that's some of the things we're looking at as the UAC.
Thank you. That answers a lot of my questions. So, and thank you for all the work you did. I mean, just us wrapping around, I mean, we can't really understand without diving in. And you guys have done hours and hours and hours of diving in, and we appreciate so much to help us to understand, to make those decisions. So I appreciate UAC a lot for all the work that you have done. I know. And still have to do.
Anyone else on the current recommendations? I think one thing we do need to keep in mind as well, you know, SNWA has been telling all of its customers, get ready for some fairly substantial rate increases. So we're going to probably see the cost of water go up, even though, you know, we're maintaining our infrastructure here. We're likely to see SNWA charges significantly more for the water itself. So that may be where we look at that accelerated payment on the debt and say, you know what, we can't do that right now. We're going to need that money to cover the SNWA increases. Mr. Todd?
We're going to also cover that by raising our water rates, not the service charge. The service charge is going to stay $10, and we're going to go after the commercial service charge, but our water rates have to go up to anticipate the cost of increase on SNWA's raw water and domestic potable water side. That's an absolute. And that's why we're asking for some time to look at all this stuff, because it is just too complex a system and a methodology to sort it out in 1, 2, or 3 hour meeting. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And the thing is like Dennis has got a lot of data that we haven't gotten a hold of as to the condition of trunk lines, water mains, sewer lines, and other things that might come up as a surprise. And we would like to be proactive instead of reactive and get ahead of the curve. And that's one of the things I do believe in. I do believe in stocking material. If we get a good deal on something, let's buy it and get it into the house. Because if something happens and we need it in an emergency, we're going to be in line like everybody else at the store trying to buy it. So that's all I'm trying to do. I do believe really strongly in using raw water for any irrigation that we have that's city-run, governed, or owned. And we have to make certain that we don't tax the existing pipes that are in the street and underneath the street, but comfortable. I do see, like I said, the Muni golf course is on potable water right now. If that can be done with some of the money that the feds are going to talk about, and it's got infrastructure improvements, if we can swing 1 million gallons a day to raw and bring it back into our potable system, then when the SNWA comes in and says you have to do a water reduction, we're ready to go.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, 4.8% a year per 1,000 gallons over the next 5 years.
So
there's also an increase in their connection charge, but that's not our connection charge. But it is 4.8%.
We're looking at 20 to 25% increase in the cost of water itself over the next 5 years.
But I believe that's what Ref Tillis already had. At the time Ref Tillis did it, we understood it was 1.5% to 4.5%, and they had either 4.5% or 5%. I'm not sure if it was 4.5 and rounded up to 5, or 4.5 in their spreadsheets rounded up. I'm not sure in the text. The text said 5%, but I'm not sure what the spreadsheets had. Yeah. So if we're at least at 4.5%. So actually, they've got that is somewhat established, and so we're still in good shape. The one thing too that Greg had referred to and we talked about is and it all is referred to as whether we do the debt. So I think what we need to look at is right now we have the separation of the different. We have a certain amount of available cash for energy. We have a certain amount of available cash for water. What do we think we're going to get? So working out, okay, where's the best place to put that? Where's the biggest bang for the buck? And one thing Greg had talked about and was starting with mentioning, I think, to make sure it's clear, is that if this year we have a good aspect of good extra revenue, then as Dennis, when we've talked to Dennis before about, is purchasing more of the necessarily equipment for the capital projects. So get it purchased now, or maybe not, I don't know if now as everything went skyrocketing, but as soon as we know that prices are reasonable again, let's start purchasing some things that we can instead of waiting for it. So that's the thing, but you are exactly right. That's what we're trying to do, is find the facts, find out what everything is, what the costs are, what's needed, and then distribute things the proper way. Again, if I think we really want to go is to help everybody, and I think we want to push that in and maybe that would even be something in a report like this, is say, okay, let's start out with the people on a budget. So let's really understand what is at cost. I'm going to repeat myself from earlier. So what is our what's our first rate aspect? So again, 0 to 8, whatever. Let's make that at cost. And then we put in the buffers into the other ones, and we put conservation in as a higher rate for water and electrical both.
Any other comments on the existing recommendations? All right, let's move then to our second agenda item, which is the items for the future. You know, we've talked about some things, several things already that we need to be on the lookout for with regard to the recommendations that have already been made. You know, one thing that I would like to see, you know, last year was not a good year for many, many reasons, and pandemic being chief among those. Canceled meetings, people unable to travel, all of that was an impact. As I mentioned earlier, our budget is complete. We're into the next year now, so let's do that. Let's not worry about, you know, what could have been done last year. Let's look at preparing next year's budget. I think the way that the council does the budget process is we start with the capital improvements. Something I would suggest, you know, we've already have a 5-year plan. We already have the money budgeted for the current year. You know, let's start looking at a longer horizon if we can and start prioritizing projects. In other words, what are the most important things to do? And of course, we've been doing some of that already, but to be able to do that in such a way that the council will then be able to look at these rates and expenditures and have some idea of what's coming up. I don't recall who mentioned it just a little bit ago, but we're going to be done with some of these really expensive capital projects here in the next 5 years maybe. So does that mean that all of a sudden things go down? You know, I don't want to get so far ahead of this that we are accumulating what would be substantial surpluses after 5 years. So if we can stretch some things out, let's see if we can do that. Often if you do, the cost starts going up. You know, inflation is going to be there on several of these things. But if there are projects that things can be stretched out over a longer horizon, I think we need to look at that so that we're not charging so much right now, and then in 5 years, all of a sudden it's like, oh, we don't need this much money anymore. I understand that the possibilities of that may not be great, but again, right now we're putting substantial costs into our system because it's necessary. We're not doing it just because, it's because it's necessary. So I would like to see a concentration on the capital improvement program, but at the same time, all of this rate stuff needs to be discussed as well because everything is dependent on how much we charge for things, and we do want to make it applicable to the customer. You know, if we have large commercial customers that are putting a high demand on the system, well, that rate should be higher. But from some of the connection fees that Mr. Todd was talking about, well, that seems to have gotten a little out of whack for what they're being charged. We did talk already about some of the American Rescue Plan money. We're going to have to decide how that can be spent to get the most benefit out of it. We're also going to have to start to look at some of these other costs that may be coming in. So concentrate on capital improvement for right now, but also looking at those other things. And that may mean that the full Utility Advisory Committee, you know, can you work with 2 or 3 people so that you don't have to have an agendized meeting and all that, and work on specific areas, like perhaps the water connection fees. You know, how many users are there? How much of a difference would a reduction in those fees cost? You know, how many users are being charged that $3,000 a month fee? So what impact would it have? maybe those can be identified by a small group and then bring the recommendations back. And do I fully recognize that that just means asking each of you to spend some extra time? Yes, I do. And I sincerely appreciate all the volunteer hours you already put in. But quite honestly, I think for your meetings, if you have subgroups that are reporting back to the full committee, you may actually save considerable time at your meetings. You know, get 2 or 3 people to work on a specific issue and then report back to the full committee at your regular meetings. Mr. Todd?
I agree with you in principle, but some of this information is in the Raftellus report, but it's just so convoluted and twisted, we can't sort it out. We just need a little more breathing room. The thing that's really amazing is that there's so much data that was compiled by their mainframe computers and then spit out into paper. And then when you bring it down into the paper aspect and you start reading it, you go, wait a minute, that isn't what they said on the other page. And so now you have to fact check every single item they put on that document. And that is very, very tedious. Yeah. And when you tell them about it, they look at you like, don't worry about it. It's what we put out. This is what we're giving you. So this is some of the problems we're having. The thing is, I do believe in water consumption rate increases, because we're losing that commodity. But the thing is do we benefit? Let's just say for SNWA comes in and says, okay, Boulder City, your potable water rate has to be cut by 10%. If I can get the golf course off of the potable water and put onto the raw water, I've already cut way more than 10%, so let's go at it, okay? The potable water is charging at, I think it was, what was it, Larry, 75% is the potable water versus non-potable? I mean, non-potable is like 75% less than the...
I think because I think it's $1 compared to 75 cents or something like that.
I mean, and then when you look at 1 million gallons a day being consumed, now this is the 1,000-gallon price mark, but you're looking at 1 million gallons a day being spit out of sprinkler heads, that's a pretty good-sized swimming pool.
Yeah. Well, and we need to look at some of the grass out of there as well. So all of those things. But yes, absolutely, we need to look at the rates from the perspective of conservation.
Right, but the service charge is a charge that goes directly to Boulder City to maintain the pipes in the ground to deliver the water to the lot or the residents or the business. The commodities charge is the charge per 1,000 gallons. Now, if you don't get dinged until you hit 60,000 gallons commercially, there's no incentive to save.
Right.
Whereas if you have a 4-tier step in residential, maybe we can do something like that to commercial, let them know that it's coming up and let them voice their opinions as to it. But I guarantee you, to charge another $1 per 1,000 gallons commercial is not going to be the end of all end means, because you're getting a reduction on your service charge on your commercial, so now you can put that money towards your commodities charge.
Yeah, as we've discussed before, the connection fee, nobody can conserve out of the connection fee.
That's correct.
It's just what you're getting charged each month.
Right.
So if that can be lowered, with the understanding that that commodity or the price per 1,000 gallons is going to go up, well,
and it should be tiered,
yeah.
Okay? In other words, it's just like one of the things I brought up at the UAC meetings, which was adopted. We'd had nothing in our resolutions for solar-powered lighting. We had no charge for solar power lighting. We were 0 to 150 watts was the starting charge. So let's break it down a little bit better, okay? And that's the things we have to do. When we have a resolution that we can review annually, okay, we need to look at what's currently trending and make sure that our charges, everything matches with what we're doing. Otherwise, there's no reason to conserve. If we don't give them a break at a lower rate, there's no reason to conserve. Warren Harhaid, God bless his soul, he had an idea. Get rid of the incandescent light bulbs in the residentials and give them LEDs. It went away, but it is a thing to think about. You know, that's a lot of savings. You can take 100 watts of power and put it into approximately, off the top of my head, 6 60-watt LED bulbs for the 100 watts incandescent power. And now guess what? For people that got the 2-story houses, you don't have to climb the ladder to get into the second floor landing to change that bulb, but once every about 10, 15 years.
Yeah, there are definitely ways that people can, all of us can conserve. One of the other focuses that I would like to see the committee have is to look at what we are currently getting in the city manager report. And again, that format has been improved recently, and look at specific targets for a biannual report to city council. So because of the budget process that we have, that would be looking at a report to the council in probably September, October of each year, and then probably in March of the following year would, I believe, best fit into our budget process. So that is very difficult to compile reports when you're meeting. There's usually a lot of work that needs to go into a report. Again, that may be something else that a subgroup could take on, and I know the committee made attempts at that, but to do that this year so that those biennial reports could be made to the city council, timed for when we're making decisions on the capital improvement project, which is usually towards the end of the year, and then on the annual budget for the city the following spring. Mr. Carr?
So in this agenda item, can we discuss that, what you're looking for?
Yes,
okay.
I think that's the point of.
Okay, just making sure I understand what I can and can't do. So, so you're saying, make sure I'm understanding what you're looking for from us is you're using the city manager report, but also I think what you'd want is the individual line items, because that has a lot more data to it. So if I'm understanding correctly, starting with the city, but is getting as much of the city financial data together that we can, and then explaining our concerns, comments, or whatever on that? Is that what you're looking for?
Well, not necessarily a monthly comment on it. What I'm saying is take a look at that new format, you probably already have, and just see, is that delivering the information that you as a committee feels is most important for the city council and the residents to be aware of? Or can something else be changed or added to that report without putting a great deal of work on anybody to provide some more information?
I have one comment off the top, if I can suggest it now, and if it is okay with city manager, is that currently in the utilities for the electric, water, and the major reports under the enterprise, they have the infrastructure cost, beginning and end, or they have the utility cost, and in that they put the infrastructure cost. I think it'd be very handy to have that broken out. So what is cash and what is the structure? Now, the cash is broke out in another area, but I think it's still, for us to have to break it out is confusing. So it would be helpful if we could, so if basically as an example, I believe the electrical started at, I think it was modified actually at $34 million. Out of the $34 million, part of that is cash available and part of that is the infrastructure, the depreciated infrastructure of the system. So all the transformers, all the distribution lines, etc. Okay.
And Mr. Mays is thinking, well, that sounds like a Mr. Porter question, but, and Mr. Porter's thinking, well, he didn't ask me, so.
Just another thought off the top of my head is we did pay the rate consultant for a handy-dandy financial model, and my first thought is, just updating that model annually with our revised capital improvement plan, our revised O&M budgets, any other changes or adjustments we want to think about making, with whether it's related to whether we do anything with the debt service on the water or change anything and make those modifications. That'll give us a good idea looking out every 5 years annually on what our fund balances are going to be and what potential impacts there could be from a rate perspective, or even we decide to start making changes to rates, what those impacts to revenues potentially could be, whether it's modification to a service charge or a commodity charge.
Absolutely. We can't wait 5 years to get an idea.
We should be able to do that at the end of every year. By the time the CAFR gets done, we get that information. Staff has the time to get the model updated. That should give us a very good idea of where we stand each year.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, because that's going to be an important part of that is before the council starts making those decisions on capital improvement projects, where are we at with the rates?
So I believe, if I'm understanding the process, and that's what we're still trying to make sure we get understanding of, is that, so if we did one twice a year, your September, October frame would be a general information, because I don't believe the city has it broken out at that time.
Well, again, I think what we're looking at is the capital improvements at that point. Where are we at with the capital improvements? So yes, we're, some dollar amount, and this is a burden on staff, but some dollar amount is going to have to be estimated as far as what the upcoming year and then the 5-year plan is going to require, so that as the council makes that decision at the end of the year, the information is available.
Well, I think several things can happen at the same time, and I think that's been sort of what's slowed us down a little bit, is that we've sort of tried to take it in steps. And I think we need to go parallel or do several things at one time. So if we start looking at the budget, and even if we start talking about philosophy, so we understand that the city doesn't have all the budgets numbers ready and stuff like that. We're not trying to push, we're not trying to put extra work on, we're just asking to make sure we understand the philosophy. There's still confusion in that, okay, exactly why did we break out the utilities? I'm not saying it was wrong, but exactly why. So there's information we don't have before that time, which seems to be 2017 or 2016, and we don't have good information beforehand. So it's hard to say we don't have 10 years of data that we can go towards it, because they don't seem to have it. So that's confusing. So if we can just sort of, so we've got more data that's been, it seems to be that we have certain things that are going towards the utilities, because, okay, now that we've broken up, we can find out what that has to be charged. And we're just trying to say, okay, does this sound right or not? So that's all we're trying to do. But if we look at the philosophy, then we can start asking questions earlier and find out, instead of getting in March when we got one meeting to ask a question and turn around and report the next time to you. So that's what we're saying. So if we did you look at the capital improvements, we've got money and structural aspects to go, and we've got the personnel to look at all that on the committee. We got people with expertise. When we look at the money aspect, in the early years, we have philosophy and the general funds. And then if I looked at the meetings right, I think the city starts giving their budgets out the first part of December, and then January, February is when a lot of the managers start having a better idea.
Mayor? Certainly, yes. The beginning of the budget process, the conversations are starting at the end of this year with an ask of each of the department managers to report to finance on their needs for the next fiscal year. Those meetings begin in January of each year. Certainly one of the things that we're looking at doing, and I will be following up with our finance director as well as our public works director, as we have evaluated this budget process this past year, on what we can do to improve the process, looking at potentially starting the conversation on the CIP sooner, so that can get the information to finance as they are incorporating that into the budget process. So kind of listening to what everyone is saying, I'm taking notes. I will circle back with those department heads to see how we can report out information that can be in sync with what you're looking to accomplish.
And again, I understand, what Mr. Carr has said, that some of the historical data is just not available. That would be nice if it is, but I do think we've gotten to a point over the last couple of years where we have a much better understanding of what the capital improvement needs are. We still don't have a complete idea of cost and all of that, but again, I think we've pretty well identified what the projects are. So that should help quite a bit as well in getting the numbers ready each year.
And so to state this earlier, adding extra work for your load also is if we could have a few extra joint meetings, that would be helpful too. Then we can discuss it easier than somebody standing up at the podium during the council meeting trying to, or have you try to digest the report that we put out.
Yeah, there could be once a draft of these biennial reports are ready, there could be a joint workshop for presentation and discussion. I think that's an excellent approach to this.
Okay, yeah, so we're happy to do whatever we can. We've started doing some of this as it is. It's just trying a matter of getting the best understanding and trying to get all the data. And that was another major point, to go back a little bit, is that between the report and what the city does, they don't match. The Raftillus report laid it out differently than how the city reports it. So you can't track it. So the more information, the more we can talk and partner with the city, then the more we can track reports. Because a lot of cases, I guess it's you have the report for your purpose, and I can understand that. But if we're trying to look at a rate purpose, it doesn't fit our needs. So if we can break some of that out without doing too much work, because I understand the need, but it would be helpful. That's what we've been trying to do, but maybe we haven't explained ourselves properly to how to break or get some additional information.
And I think, as Mr. Porter pointed out, Raftillus has given us a model now. If there's something wrong with the model, that can be fixed. If there's something that we don't feel is right about that, but at least now we have something that we can use as a reference, at least once a year, maybe twice a year, to give us an idea of where we're at. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess just kind of looking at the big scope of everything, I am happy to hear that there was enough useful information in the Raftillus report to allow us to get to the point where we're at, and to start moving forward. But I do worry sometimes that, if there's not useful information in there, right? If there is information in there that is not useful because it just doesn't match up, or there's inconsistencies with it, then at the end of the day, then it's not usable. And I want to make sure that, it's good to get into the weeds and make sure we understand, what is working, why it's working. But at a certain point, we have to get out and be able to see the forest for the trees at the same time too. So we want to be sure that, it's good to identify that there's a problem with it. And if there's a problem with it, we don't need to try and, I don't think so much time and effort should be spent on trying to identify exactly where that went wrong, but rather just putting, the information. The city has the information, right? The city has it, and I know it doesn't go as back as far as maybe we would like to have it, but to the point that we do, those things can get plugged in so that we can start to move forward. When we talk about things like the issue that was brought up with, 4 different utility bills for 1 meter. There are bigger picture issues that I think can be addressed that almost get glossed over, get forgotten about, or just you don't have time when so much gets spent into the things that almost aren't there. You know what I'm trying to say? So I think it would be very helpful to, when those problems and inconsistencies are identified, make sure that they are identified, because I think there should be a certain, level of a reasonable person should expect that information that's being provided to them by a consultant firm should be accurate. And so if it's not, it's good to identify it. But at a certain point, if we're spending all of our time trying to identify exactly where that number went wrong and what sent us down that, if we get lost down that rabbit hole, then we're not actually accomplishing the end goal here. So I think, it's trying to take a step back, get in there, get in the weeds, make sure we know what we're talking about, but then being able to get back and look at the bigger picture so that we're not losing the overall goal, which is to, fairly and equitably provide, our utility services to the customers, to the people. At the end of the day, unfortunately, it can't be the goal to let's always cut rates. It's not going to always be a possibility. But if we can always make it a goal that we are being responsible, that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that people aren't paying more than they need to, that the service is being provided fairly, then at least people can have the trust that what they're paying into is worthy of that payment. So I think that's, we can't lose focus of that's what the ultimate goal is to instill that trust and faith that we are moving forward in a forward-thinking way about their utilities, because that's always been the concern here is people, they don't understand why were the rates going up, why are things not, it was a point of concern. There was just not a lot of faith in the system, and that's why I think that was the big reason and the big push to get the Utility Advisory Committee established in the first place. So, I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that goal of instating that trust. Making sure that people understand what it is that they're paying into and why. And at the end of the day, they're not going to care about every single little number in the thing. They're going to care about, am I getting a fair service provided to me at a fair rate? And if we can accomplish that goal, then I think then we've done our job. So that would be my overall recommendation on how we need to look at things. So, but I appreciate all of the work that Utility Advisory Committee has put in. I mean, it puts in a lot of hours, and when I watch those videos, a lot of it does go over my head, and I try my best to and these group meetings actually do help, because it helps to be able to have that back and forth and to be, even if I'm not having the technical conversation, sitting in on it really does help start to untangle some of those knots that get put in there when I listen to some of it. So I do definitely think that it is helpful to have these joint meetings, and without any more undue burden on staff, it does help, and I certainly welcome them myself. So thank you.
Yeah, can I comment on that? So I guess that was part of my question, and maybe at the last of the report, is that it's exactly sort of where we're at, is where do we go with this report? Is this meeting, I think I did state, does this meeting work as a report for us to say that you got our understanding? Or do you want something in writing, or do we go? I think what you've said, and I think what most of us are saying, is it can be used for reference, but we don't really think it's a report that should just be utilized for what it was, the overall intent was to say, okay, to accept its recommendations. So I appreciate that, because I think that's what we're all trying to figure out, is how much more time do we spend on this to understand it. We've got the general idea, but I don't think any of us have read it word for word. I've tried to go through every single page, but I've not been able to necessarily do word for word. And so to do that is a lot more time. So you're right, if it's broken in certain cases, do we need to say, okay, it's broken here, or to say, hey, let's go forward, use what we can, and then make it do something that we can do better? If that's the way it would go, I think that would be helpful. The rest of the committee?
Mr. Todd?
What we're trying to say is we don't recommend full implementation of the report, and that has to go on record. Okay, we're pulling out the pieces that we feel comfortable with, but I would like to, as a citizen of Boulder City and also a member of the UAC, I'd like to see Mr. Porter run a mock-up of their program and see what spits out the other end, and then do it mechanically by hand and see if the numbers jive. Because some of the stuff in here is quite scary, and one who was really good at pointing out was George Ree. He says, there's no way this stuff is even close to what it should be on formula and computations. But it's like I as a UAC member and a citizen, I cannot recommend full implementation of the report. It's just not right.
And I think at this point, the city council has already made some of those decisions. I can't say that I've read every single footnote within the report, but the franchise fee was a non-starter, and that is, at least at this time, going to be a non-starter. The rate reductions, as we look at the amount of money that was in and available for our capital improvement projects for the foreseeable, the 3 to 5 year period, the rate reductions were doable. The cost of service, again, I can tell you what my view is. I don't believe that those were accurate. I think they have a real problem with the way they did their reasoning behind those. Now, as far as other information in the report, I think, again, what we should do is take whatever we can out of it as far as the rate model that they've left with us. Absolutely, we need a dry run on something like that. You know, we need the numbers plugged into it now, see how they come out, and say, does that look reasonable or not? If it doesn't, you know, then we try and fix the model, and if we can't fix the model, we look for some other way to do it.
The Reftillis should give us a report, some support on that rate model study, okay? So that's why I'm saying let's do a dry run first. And if you're having trouble sleeping at night, the Reftillis report makes awesome bedtime reading material.
Or if you need to keep a door open or something, it's a good paperweight as well.
Expensive for a paperweight.
But again, there is good information in there about some of the things. So I think that over the budget cycle, the council pretty well indicated already what our decisions were, the parts of the report we were going to put into effect and those we weren't. So at this point, I think from what Councilmember Adams has said and Mr. Carr, the report's in and we're moving on. Anyone else? Councilmember Bridges?
It may sound very basic, but I'd like to see a list of the questions that are being asked. This is pages, charts, numbers. I feel like it would be easier for me to wrap my mind around it to say what are the questions we're asking and where are we finding that information and where can we better get that information. It seems that it sounds simplistic, but
Yeah, I know what you're looking for, and we did it. We had a 20-question page that we submitted, and we got nothing back from them. It was just fell into dead air. And I know what you're looking for, and I know what you're asking about, and we did it. We have a questionnaire that the UAC put together on all these bullet items, and it didn't go anywhere.
Right. Coming from academia, it's like, I'm giving you an exam, and here are the questions that you need to answer in the exam. And I remember grading papers where I felt like I was working my way through a bowl of spaghetti. And somewhere in there was the answer to the question. I just wasn't sure what it is. And some of this really does seem like a bowl of spaghetti that I'm not sure it's really answering those. I'd like to see the 20 questions.
We should have it on file, right, Larry? The questionnaire we filled out to Reftillis about asking questions about certain things and what our recommendations were on the report.
But see, the one that we sent to them was what they got in the packet, and that's the with the questions in the report itself.
Yeah, and we never got answered back.
That's what you got received in the packet you didn't see the red line strikeout, but the questions are there. So it's like
the initial questions.
That's not the original questions. That was the final questions.
Well, I want to see the original questions.
Well, I guess the question would be, not to put you on the spot, Tammy, but it would be helpful. The minutes are part of we're trying to work with. So we've tried to, because where I came from, we called them action items, but since that's separate from what the city does with the open meeting law, so we were trying to call it deliverables. And we were trying to figure out, asking when we ask a question in the meeting, could we put a deliverable together, or could we have it part of the minutes? And it's not easy. I understand putting minutes together are not easy, but could we put the list of questions in the minutes easier? Do you know? Am I making sense?
I'm not sure if I really understand what you're asking. So you're saying that the minutes don't reflect what took place at the meeting?
No, don't.
Mr. Carr, the role of the minutes are to really provide a record of the meeting, not provide information to council or staff. That's really better done through another medium. Certainly, materials can be produced by members of the committee or staff.
No, I didn't mean that in that manner, so if I misspoke, I apologize. What I was trying to get at is sometimes in the meeting minutes, so we don't want verbatim, they said this, they said that, but some of the questions was, okay, a question was asked to the consultant, a question was asked to the city or something like that. So if that was documented in the minute, it explains what we did in the meeting and it's documented, so we don't always, if we didn't get our own question written down. But if that's not pertinent for the minutes, that's fine, because I want to keep the minutes shorter. I totally agree with that. But how do we get that? Because that's one of the things we aren't necessarily getting is we're stating it, but we're not getting necessarily written documentation of what's been asked.
If I could interrupt, please. It's really, I'm concerned we're going down a path that isn't the question I asked. Okay, the question I asked is when you initially met with Raftelis and they asked you what it is you wanted, what were you looking for? What direction, what do you want us to provide to you, and how do we best answer those questions? What were those questions? Are our rates on track? Are our fixed costs on track? This is a report, but I guess I'd like to know the initial idea or theme that went into this, so I could read it and say, yes, that answered that question, or no, it doesn't seem like they're answering those kinds of questions. They're just giving us a lot of data.
You would have to ask the ex-city manager that question, because he's the one that hired Raftelis. When we asked questions specifically to them when they met us for the first time, they said, we don't work for you, we work for the city manager.
Oh, wonderful.
So okay. That started this whole rabbit hole that you're talking about. And Councilman Adams, the problem with this 4-unit fourplex was brought up through Raftelis on the rate charge. So do you give all the customers of the fourplex the $10 reduction in the service charge? Yes, you do. But they're only being served by 1 meter. So that's not us, the city, to tell them how they're going to pay the bill. That is up to the owner of record on the property, 1 meter, 1 lot, 1 residence. If it's a fourplex or fourplex with a casita in the back or whatever you want it, that's 1 meter. So why are we, the city, in the resolutions, charging the fourplex 5 service charges when it's only being served by 1 meter? And that's in a resolution. So to have us, the UAC, unscramble the resolution, now you're talking about documents that were created by the city that we can only thumbs up, thumb down. So that's one of the problems that came as part of the rate study and as part of the resolution review and everything else. And there's all kinds of little things. Yeah, it's very complex, but UAC had no business or no input in hiring Raftelis. And when we got the first rough draft, we were all scratching our heads. I'm not going to lie, I've been in the business for over 30 years. I put this stuff in, I know what it costs. And when they started talking about cost of service and everything, they're up there, they're in Venus, we're down here on Earth. And we're trying to take and get enough money through our rate charges and our service charges to cover what we owe and have some for the what if and the just in case.
I would just remind members that the agenda item at hand is discussion of future objectives and responsibilities. So the focus should really be here on the future responsibilities and objectives of the UAC.
Something you might consider going forward is an agenda item where it would be cumulative over time of issues that the committee wishes to report to the council. And then when you get to the point of doing one of these biennial reports, you can incorporate that information into it. That may be one way to memorialize the information as you go forward. Any other recommendations? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Since we're trying to decide the future objectives, I think that we've all agreed that the report is inaccurate. So I think we should, as Councilman Adams stated and Mayor McManus stated, we should move forward and let the group experience what we need to do and get on with it instead of trying to find out what they did wrong or what someone did wrong. I think we're wasting your time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Recommendations for future directions? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that we're going in a direction of bringing back to us information that's relevant to the fact that within the next year we might be taking a 10% reduction in water availability. Okay, because that's directly from a chart. And so it's easy to start coming up with all that other stuff, but I do think it's important that that reporting process includes those kinds of statistics, and those are pretty easy to acquire.
Anyone else?
I guess, can I just give a sort of a feedback of what the resolution says and what we're looking for? So I think what you said is there. So what we're looking at doing, and as part of the resolution that created us, and we're working with Dennis, and that's the thing we're trying to do, is figure out our timetables for when to get things done and what we have to do. So we're looking at the resources, and so that for water, electrical, what does the city need? And we've talked about it and trying to get it going. So in a lot of cases, the key issue is trying to get the right agenda item so we can talk. And so looking at the, I keep on saying the acronym wrong, the resources for the city. There's a plan that has to be done every 5 years. It's not due for a little bit. We're going to work on that. But we need to understand, as Greg has pointed out, what is needed if we go solar, and if people decide to put a lot of solar on the roof, what do we need? What does the infrastructure need? Do we need bigger transformers? So the earlier we understand that, the more we can do it. So we're looking at resources. We're finally getting to the point of looking at conservation. So the water issue will be there. We've constantly gone with the issue of ongoing capital and trying to get a better understanding of that. And the city has done great strides in getting more reports and documentation. We greatly appreciate that. And we can understand it more as the meetings go on. So I think that's what I think sort of the main, to go redo, the main thing we're looking at is the resources, the budget, the capital, and conservation is something that we're pushing for to go into the future. Am I missing a major idea? I'm trying to remember if there was another major idea. So is there anything else on that we're missing that you guys are looking for?
I think that covers it. Anyone else? Last chance before we go to public comment. Okay, we will go to our final public comment period then. Anyone wishing to make comment may do so on any issue. The phone number is 702-589-9629. Again, this is our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to make public comment, the phone number is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, were there any comments submitted prior to the meeting?
None were received.
Thank you. And this is the final public comment period for the Joint City Council Utility Advisory Workshop. The phone number 702-589-9629. Hearing no one for public comment, we will close the final public comment period. Again, I know many of us have already said it, but the hours that members of the committee put in, well, the city cannot thank you enough, I can tell you that. This is saving folks some money. It's certainly saving all of us a lot of time and confusion trying to sort this all out. City staff over the past year, again, great job on getting this information to people. I see this as being so far improved of where we were at 2 years ago. We're making a lot of progress, so thank you all for that, and we're adjourned.